Mm, mm. Peace and long life, fellow sci-fi fans. So I finally finished Buck Rogers season 2. Altogether, well, it's a mixed bag. Some parts of it are better than season 1. I really like the introduction of Hawk, the idea of the hawk, the bird people distantly related to humans, also being from Terra. That's a very interesting story. I wonder at the necessity of adding a male sidekick with Buck to be a best friend to replace Wilma, whether there wasn't some sort of feeling that Wilma was too much of an action hero. She was never really the love interest, though sort of. It was kind of maybe, but she was sort of the best friend while he was Captain Kirking around the universe with various femalians. Nevertheless, completely unnecessary, I think, to replace her the way they did. Of course, she stayed on the show, but she was demoted to far less of an action role most of the time. We did see her in her Starfighter at one point, but not even wearing a helmet so that her new freely flowing hair about her shoulders could be seen. Most of the time she was dressed like a stewardess, and in the last episode, she actually talks to passengers who they've brought on board for an evacuation as though she is their hostess. It's relatively disturbing, at least to current sensibility. Myself, in my ordinary life on the 21st century Earth, being quite a bit culturally traditionalist, I don't even like the word conservative. It still seemed very unnecessary to me to be changing up Wilma's character in this way. Putting them on a starship also seemed very unnecessary. They had the Stargates, which literally made the universe their oyster. The idea of the mission to track down lost Terran tribes is actually kind of interesting. It gives it a more consistent mission. And I think you could have done all of that with season 2 without introducing the Searcher or attempting to make it as they did. It was a little bit Star Trek, a little bit Battlestar Galactica, a little bit Star Wars, blended together to be a little bit Buck Rogers. Uh, Finding Hawk, helping him in the search for his people, tracking down Project Searcher, you could even call it, from Earth. You could add more characters to it as part of the team. There was no reason to get rid of Dr. Hewer, though Admiral Asimov is a relatively interesting character. The doctor that everyone found jovial, I really didn't care for. Nevertheless, you could have done the whole thing from Earth, based from Earth. The best episodes, such as the second to last with Mount Rushmore featured, they come back to Earth easy enough through Stargate. So most of the changes were unnecessary. Some of it was sort of gratuitously playing to bizarre cultural expectations of the time. I think the low point of the entire series, both seasons, was the episode with the alien crew made up entirely of little people, all of whom were generals except the one who had to be a private so they could boss him around, and he just happened to be the only one that was black. And they get together and they jokingly talk about Wilma's breasts, her bumps, and they try to undress her with their psychic power. Again, even for the early 1980s, I feel this was a low point for the series. Overall, the season 2 struggles, though, remain the same as the first, despite all the unnecessary changes. Even with the new setup, like I said, that had potential, with the universe literally being their oyster, they seem to have no ideas. They recycle a lot of damsel in distress stuff in the first season. Second season, they're trying to be Battlestar Galactica, Star Wars, Star Trek, never really finding a footing. When they had the opportunity to literally find anything on the other side of one of those Stargates at a world and do anything that they ever wanted, we saw the return of Star Trek people who'd been on the original Star Trek show up, people that had worked behind the scenes show up behind the scenes. There's such a potential to do those sorts of stories of finding alien worlds beyond the Stargate and just do them in a Buck Rogers way. And they never really get there, which is unfortunate. Overall, it's very entertaining. I do like, and I had forgotten to mention in the first video I did about season one, though they don't really revisit it in season two. Season one gave us the political science, the fascinating political system where there's a computer council and they make decisions. And the computer counselors each seem to have a specialty, though, and they do decree things like legal cases. We saw that. But then there are human directors like Dr. Hewer, and they never get us into any sort of discussion of the actual constitutional structure or whatever. But I think that one of the most interesting parts of the series is they gave us a future where artificial intelligence, which is coming into its own in science fiction, particularly at the time, they're talking about it, and not in what would end up by Terminator being a frightening Skynet sort of way, not a Matrix sort of way, not a computers are going to dominate us, or we've learned how to dominate them and keep them under our thumb. But there's this confusing sort of, they're treated as equals, like they're living machines, so they're alive. They can have positions of authority, but not necessarily based on their model, their type, or even maybe their individual achievements. And they don't replace humans or seem to be oppressing us. Rather, we seem to have figured out a system by which AI is in its place. And when we need to ask for things that we know we can't compute at that speed, we ask them, but they're not really our bosses. And I think that was sort of unexplored for the most part, but a very fascinating part of the whole sci-fi premise of the show that would have been nice to see more of. Anyway, that's Buck Rogers. Fun viewing. I'm sure I'll watch it again as years go by, but those are the upsides, the downsides. Live long and prosper, sci-fi fans.
I must go on patrol. I leave our charming guests entirely in your